There's a lot of research to support the kind of negative impacts of kind of chronic sleep deprivation. First is that exacerbation of anything that they're already experiencing. So if you have a child that already has anxiety, depression, ADHD, chronic sleep deprivation is going to make any of that worse.
Generally, sleep, right? Even from little babies, right? We know they need so much sleep because that's when their brain's developing, that's when they're growing. And that's the same thing for our adolescents, right? They still need that sleep time for their brain to grow, to develop, to recharge.
Welcome back to the Parenting Pair podcast. I'm Dr. Suzanne Allen.
And I'm Dr. Annalise Caron.
And today we're welcoming back two clinical psychologists, Dr. Allison Shale and Dr. Andrea Roth, who were with us on a previous episode discussing sleep and adolescent and teen and tween sleep. And they have written an incredible book, The Essential Guide to Children's Sleep, a tired caregiver's workbook for every age and stage that we would highly recommend. It is a excellent, very in-depth, evidence-based book, but also very easy to read and digest. So kind of a win for all parents out there who don't have time to read a 500-page guide. Mm-hmm. I would recommend this nice. If you're watching, you can see how lovely and nice and thin, yet it's chock full of really good information.
So why don't we, maybe if you could just explain to us what is insomnia and why should we be concerned with it?
So I think in this population, we were talking about pediatrics, we're talking about children and adolescents. Insomnia in general is effectively the difficulty or inability to initiate sleep or fall asleep, maintain sleep, so stay asleep, or getting up too early. That's kind of how we will blanketly describe that. And that's how we see it often in adults. And so in pediatrics, there are two subtypes of insomnia. One that focuses more around limit setting. So again, this kind of phenotype maybe of the child who struggles to listen to boundaries and kind of follow that structure. And then also a sleep association subtype, which is the type that really requires something or more likely someone to fall asleep and stay asleep. So again, it is that difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking too early. And in childhood, it's really looked at mostly from that behavioral lens of those two types.
And when a child or teen struggles with that, right, and depending upon the subtype, of course, that would impact sort of how one might clinically respond, address that. But if they are struggling with insomnia and getting maybe not enough sleep or really struggling to be effective in doing so, how does that impact them sort of in their daily lives? Like, what are the risks or concerns? Why should we, really attend to this?
Yeah, sleep impacts so much about our health, our growth, right? Our mood, our ability to focus, our ability to concentrate. One thing that we talked about in our last podcast was this idea that we rely on our adolescents to tell us a lot of what they're struggling with. Sometimes it comes out in those gripes of, I couldn't focus, I have no clue what's on the math test because I just couldn't focus today. Sometimes it's just the general complaint of, I'm so tired, I can't keep my eyes open. It can also be the kid who every day comes home and says they need a nap, like religiously has to take a lengthy nap after school. And we know, just generally sleep, right? Even from little babies, right? We know they need so much sleep because that's when their brain's developing, that's when they're growing. Yeah. And that's the same thing for our adolescents, right? They still need that sleep time for their brain to grow, to develop, to recharge, all of those sorts of things that then impact them. I hate to say the word behavioral again, but then they really come out. We see it more in teens coming out behaviorally with their mood, with their attitude, with their focus, all of those sorts of things. And we know, when your kid is overtired, your 15-year-old overtired is maybe short with you or a little snippy. And so they might not feel that as a reason that they need more sleep, right? Because they're quick to say, I wasn't yelling at you. That wasn't being nasty. I'm not in a bad mood. So, a lot of those things that we wait for them to tell us can be our signs that there's some sort of issue going to sleep. And even with our older kids, right? With our younger kids, yes, it's more likely they're, coming out of bed a million times at bedtime. But even with our older kids, some of them are coming out a lot too and saying, they just can't sleep. Or you hear them, maybe you're in your own bedroom and you hear them flushing the toilet. You hear them getting a drink of water. So sometimes they don't even realize that it's taking them a long time to fall asleep. Or that they're up for a long time, even with great sleep hygiene. And so, again, sorry, I went in a million different directions with that answer. No. But there's so many different things we might notice on the outside. And then there's also those things happening on the inside that they're missing out on by not sleeping enough.
But I think those are very good cues, for the adolescents. They might be complaining of fatigue. And I think sometimes we parents, that's just one of the many list of complaints. But if it's a chronic one, daytime sleepiness or excessive fatigue is something to pay attention to. Is it fair to say, is it correct to say that with sort of chronic sleep difficulties, whatever it might be, whether it's leading to insomnia and not getting enough sleep, or whether, it's another clinical sleep issue, that can lead to other mental health concerns, or can make some maybe other mental health concerns that are there more significant, like anxiety or depression or anything else. Could you speak to that at all?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of research to support the kind of negative impacts of kind of chronic sleep deprivation. First is that exacerbation of anything that they're already experiencing. So if you have a child that already has anxiety, depression, ADHD, chronic sleep deprivation is going to make any of that worse. And then there's also research to really support difficulties in other realms of life around academic success, as Allison mentioned before, kind of these more executive functioning type affect or aspects, there's a word, of focus and things like that. And then there is even data to support the idea that there's physical ramifications, medical well-being, obesity, higher risk of obesity in older children, and then even in adolescents, more high risk behavior is linked to more chronic sleep deprivation as well. So substance use, et cetera, things like that.
I know that you mentioned, some of these kind of differences with younger children, but I just want to acknowledge, and there may be parents out there thinking this themselves. I've found in clinical practice, often this takes time and some building of trust because there can be a lot of shame around this. But I do actually find that a lot of adolescents still might be going into their parents' bedroom or having a parent sleep in their room. And, I think that's something that often doesn't get discussed. And I think rightfully so in terms of our teens' privacy, not sharing that maybe with the neighborhood or the sports team. But I think it's something that a lot of families wind up feeling kind of embarrassed about, or teens feel very embarrassed about. And so they don't necessarily seek help for that because that's something little kids do, right? And now you have your 16-year-old son who crawls into bed. But I'm curious, do you see that as much in your practice? And then how do you address that?
Yeah. So, it's funny because sometimes when they get to that 14, 15, 16, that is actually when they're saying, like, I hate that I'm still coming into your room at night. They are like embarrassed for themselves. It means maybe they can't have a sleepover. They're nervous for that, band trip to Disney World in 10th grade because they can't be in a hotel room like without mom or dad. So, I actually find that some of those kids are the ones that actually, maybe a parent has said, like, I don't care, I love you, come in as much as you want. And
we're holding on.
But yeah, like they're just holding on. They're just happy to have like a little extra snuggle. Like, what could be so bad about this? And then their kid says, like, I really don't like this. I think generally there is such pressure and, stigma's not the right word, but around sleep, right? Everybody wants to know from the day your baby is born, are they a good sleeper? How much do they sleep? When does your kid go to bed? How late? Right? You hear it. I was at a soccer game for my own son last night and people were talking about what time do their kids go to bed. I mean, it's just everywhere. And so, yeah, I think that for our older kids, there can be sometimes shame and embarrassment, but I actually really do find that those are the kids that are often asking for the help because they don't like it. There comes a point where they kind of don't like it, or it's really stopping them from things. Maybe they want to try a sleepaway camp or things like that, and they just really feel like they can't. And so I actually think that sometimes that's such a motivating factor. But yes, parents do not tell other parents that their kid at 15 is still coming into their room, even though many other parents would go, oh yeah, mine did too. They don't want camaraderie on that.
It's interesting you bring up, because I think this is where in adolescence, right, there's more external pressure and social pressure on kids because there are some other concerns, right? Enuresis. Can you speak a little bit about some of the other, maybe more kind of clinical issues that are related to sleep that can impact teens and tweens, who, like you said, want to go on the band trip or sleep over at a friend's house?
Yeah, one thing that we talk about all the time, and this is probably written in the book like 10 separate times, is that we ask a lot of questions about the medical stuff, and we will very often tell people to go see their pediatrician, go see some specialist, go see that, because the medical side of something like enuresis or wetting the bed, the medical side of snoring and sleep apnea and things like that, those things really need to be handled before we can work on your child's worry about going to bed, right? If there's a real medical reason why they're wetting the bed at 15 or 16, then that really needs to be handled. And me trying to convince them, or setting an alarm or things like that, while behaviorally kind of makes sense, they might not be able to do it. And again, from that buy-in piece, I want them to know, like, this is real. I know you're not just choosing to wet the bed. I know you're not this or that. I know this, sometimes it is just laziness, but it's usually not. So we like to refer back to our medical friends to help people get those things under control and then come back to us. And then we're happy to help from maybe there is anxiety then still about wetting the bed, or what will I do if I wet the bed at sleepaway camp or something like that. So sometimes we can deal with it medically, and then we can help people come up with plans for what will you do if it does happen again. Just to help kids feel a little more secure in it, because of course that, understandably, that would be embarrassing to sleep at a friend's house and have wet the bed.
Just on this topic, because I imagine people may be listening with, the 15 or 16-year-old, but maybe they also have, the younger sibling who's 9 or 10, right? So speaking of enuresis and specifically, meaning wetting the bed or having difficulty, waking oneself if they need to use the restroom in the middle of the night, it's another whole issue. But regardless, when would you say it leans over into describing that 15 or 16-year-old as you should really see a medical person? When kids are younger, we do say like this, over time they may grow out of this. What is sort of the age or stage where a parent maybe should seek a little more medical advice on that issue?
So I think it's so interesting, because I think we come across pediatricians that will say 7. I think 7 is the number that I hear the most often, but I have also come across pediatricians that effectively will say, it's an issue and it's an issue to them. I don't care until they care. If they're okay wearing the pull-up, I'm okay with them wearing the pull-up. So there is, I think, this little bit of disparity in the kind of consensus around it. I think the number that I hear the most often is 7. But regardless of that, I think Allison's right. I think there are a lot of behavioral things that we all do to help with enuresis and bedwetting, and there's a lot of behavioral strategies that we can use. But I think even when we are doing that, at least in our clinical practice, I will still recommend, you should still meet with your pediatrician, make sure that there's nothing kind of medical underlying this, because we don't want to kind of put a behavioral Band-Aid on something that's a little more, medical or structural. And so no matter what, we kind of usually will say, talk to us, but also talk to them.
Would you, one of you be able to speak, or both, be able to speak to some of the more common tween and teen parasomnias that, concerns that come up in sleep that might not be as frequently known or, common, but that also can scare parents a lot or be of concern? Could you speak a little bit to that and what to do?
You asked about parasomnias in teens and tweens. The good news is that by teen, tween, a lot of those very big, scary parasomnias, in theory, should have kind of gone away a little bit by then, because parasomnias, or very wonderfully, elegantly put, like weird stuff that happens while we're sleeping, undesirable stuff that happens while we're sleeping, things like sleep terrors. So your child is possibly sitting up, thrashing, screaming bloody murder, or sleepwalking, pretty self-explanatory, or enuresis counts as one. Those sorts of things, those tend to peak at a much, much, much younger age, closer into kind of like early childhood, preschool age, and then tend to taper a little bit as kids get older, or they will shift into something called a confusional arousal, which is like the cousin of a sleep terror, but really innocuous. It might be a little bit longer, but it's much more innocuous. It's like, I'm possibly getting up out of bed. I am sitting up. I might look very, very awake, but I am speaking probably not fully English or making a lot of sense. I'm not really there because I'm not really fully awake. That's a confusional arousal. And that's what we see a little bit more commonly in teen and tween children, teen and tweens. So again, that big scary stuff, sleep terrors, big sleepwalking, things like that, those tend to fade or shift into when they're teens and tweens.
Should parents be concerned if there's confusional arousal or sleep talking, or are those indicative of anything, or are those, just like you said, kind of quote unquote weird things that happen?
Yeah.
I know indicative of.
They're great. Sorry, they're great data points. I think the good things to know about this is that there's a good hereditary loading. So if you have a biological parent that experienced things like this as when they were young, the child is much more likely to experience them as well. And they're not uncommon to happen every once in a blue moon. But if you're seeing them happen on a regular basis, it can be indicative of the fact that the kid, the teen, the tween, is not getting enough sleep as a whole. And so you want, if you look at them and they're not obviously sleep deprived in the sense of like, my 8-year-old sleeps from 8:30 to 7 or 8:30 to 6:30. She's getting enough sleep. That's so odd. She doesn't wake up. She doesn't wake up during the night. She goes to bed pretty quickly. That's pretty odd. That's when we want to look at anything medical underlying those things that Allison touched on a little bit ago. We want to make sure that there's no apnea. They're not snoring. They're not gasping, holding their breath. We want to make sure there's no restless leg syndrome. They're not thrashing all night long. They're not complaining of any discomfort in their limbs, because items like that could be impacting not necessarily the quantity of sleep that they're getting, but the quality of sleep that they're getting, which then makes them infinitely more likely to have one of those parasomnias. So parasomnias really can be indicative of the fact that they're not getting enough and good enough sleep as a whole. So it's, while alarming, they're actually, again, great data markers for us.
Okay. Another really interesting thing that I was not aware of that I saw in the book was that you mentioned the prevalence of nightmares in the middle school years, that tends to peak. Could you talk about that a little bit? I was surprised by that. I think much more of nightmares with younger kids, but maybe that's because they come in more often to share them with you. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that sometimes is part of it, is that our little kids might say it a little bit more. I think, though, that there's a lot of anxiety. And, sometimes kids will, I notice that teens, tweens, they're having nightmares not about like the scary monster. They're having nightmares about the tests. They're having nightmares about something that happened with a friend. Their nightmares are almost like a little bit more realistic. I don't know if there's actually like data on the content of the nightmares, but I find that kids are coming in and their nightmare, or teens, they're coming in about their nightmares, which are really like just extensions of their worry. And for a lot of sleep work, and this is something we talk about in the book a lot also, is we really try to think about who your child is outside of their sleep stuff, because that gives us so much context to what's actually going on and what's actually getting in the way and what's actually making things hard. So whether that's looking at like sleep hygiene when it comes to parasomnias in general, right? Because that's really our frontline treatment for all of those things, whether your kid's 6 and having real night terrors and things that we're really defining as a night terror, or a later in life, maybe it's just this confusional arousal. Sleep hygiene is always our kind of top line of defense, that we want to get them more sleep and better sleep. But I think that the nightmare piece is because I see it as like almost an extension of the daytime thoughts.
I know a lot of terms that we use in our work are now thrown out a lot in kind of the common lexicon, and sleep hygiene might be one of them. I would love to hear what sleep hygiene is from two behavioral sleep experts versus my Instagram feed.
Right.
Although I'm following you guys, so I'll listen to yours.
I wonder if, Andrew, it's funny. I don't know if our definitions are exactly the same or if we say them like a little bit differently to people. But I always say, like, cleaning up the pieces of your sleep that we can control. What you do before you go to bed, what you do when you're getting into bed. And I like to say clean up, because hygiene, that kind of like resonates with people a little bit. And for me, it's a lot around that. Whenever anyone comes to us, we have them fill out a sleep log for about a week or so to show us, no matter how old they are, what time they go to bed, how long it takes to fall asleep, things like that. So a lot of times I'll say to them, here's what you're doing, and here's the parts of it that we're going to clean up. That's called sleep hygiene, because those are the things that we're going to clean with your sleep, and we're going to work on this or this or this. So I feel like my definition is probably a little looser than how Andrea may describe it, but those are the terms I like to use with people, just to kind of, no big deal, we're going to work on this, not to create panic around sleep hygiene.
Mm-hmm. She's just so much more engaging than I am. She's got so many cute books that I just don't have. I'm over here like, let's talk about confusional arousals and non-REM parasomnias. And she's like talking about dream planting and sleep hygiene stuff. She's so much more fun than me.
We balance each other. Right.
It's just it's your sleep habits. I mean, I think it's the stuff that Google will in fact tell you that's like mostly accurate, I suppose. And right. And then consistency. Because I do think that Allison's right. That is the biggest piece of sleep habits or sleep hygiene that gets missed. Yes, the stuff that the pediatrician, Google tells you, limiting caffeine and sugary treats before bed, limiting light exposure before bed, being active during the day, staying hydrated, having a good sound sleep, pre-sleep routine before bed, all good things. The general habits, again, anyone will tell you. Cool, dark, and quiet room. But the one that gets missed is the one that Allison's talking about, is having consistency. Consistency in regards to that pre-sleep routine and consistency to your sleep schedule, bedtime, wake time. So really, as cute as hers is, it is the most accurate. It is probably the most important one.
Great.
It's both cute and perfect.
Thanks for the label, please.
If we could shift a little bit and talk about, different populations, neuroatypical populations, maybe individuals with autism spectrum disorders or ADHD, and also just, and we spoke about this a bit at the beginning, but, anxiety and depression and mood dysregulation. Just, could you speak a little bit about what we know from the research about sleep and ADHD? I know we have a number of listeners with kids who have attention deficit disorder. There we go.
And a lot of challenges with sleep.
Yeah.
And amongst
Yeah.
other areas of the population.
Absolutely. So I think first, what's interesting to think about is there are, I think, no diagnoses, maybe medical or, psychiatric, that don't have some association with sleep difficulties. All of them. Like everything has some sort of association with sleep difficulty in possibility. But yes, in pediatrics, the diagnoses that we see the most commonly associated with sleep difficulties are children that have ADHD and autism spectrum disorder. You mentioned ADHD specifically, and I think it's a really important one to touch on because it is so highly impacted, when it comes to their sleep. I think for a while it was really thought to be an issue with kind of the medication, the nature of the medication that they take being, stimulant medication. But kind of as research has progressed, we have this more broad-based understanding of that it's so many aspects of ADHD that really impact sleep, from kind of behavioral defiance or disorganization that comes with maybe that, again, pre-sleep routine, respecting boundaries, following boundaries, being able to stick with a consistent schedule. And there are more neurological associations having to do with sleep initiation as well. Kids with ADHD have a higher comorbidity of being phase delayed. So that kind of being a night owl, struggling to go to sleep kind of at an appropriate or developmentally appropriate time. And interestingly enough, they do have a higher comorbidity with things that are more medical, like restless leg syndrome. So it's hard to not almost feel discouraged, I would think, as a parent or a caregiver of a child with ADHD. It really feels like the odds are stacked against you when it comes to good, restful sleep. But because there is more research associated with it, on the flip, there are a lot of supports, and there's been a lot of progress made in terms of ways that we can help out this population specifically, which is fantastic.
Would you want to speak to that a little bit? I'm just thinking of our last podcast. You did mention that with ADHD and individuals with autism spectrum disorders, those would be populations where maybe melatonin is considered, but you might be speaking to other types of behavioral interventions before something like melatonin. So could you just speak just to provide that little hope for our moms and dads listening with a child with ADHD who's maybe showing sleep concerns?
Absolutely. And what I will say is we just quickly said as well, kids with autism spectrum disorder also have a really big struggle with sleep as well. And I would say if your child, is on the spectrum and is struggling with sleep, the need to answer our question, gosh, you asked about 15 minutes ago now, to find a specialist in that department is really, really important and really, really relevant. A behavioral specialist that really knows about that is going to be top of the list importance to do. Even Allison and I have good referral sources for children that are on the autism spectrum that have sleep difficulties, because that concern can feel so
specific. Yeah.
so specific. Children with ADHD, yes, I think there are a lot of behavioral interventions that we can use. So a lot of the things that we would do during the day, as Allison said before, we're going to look at the daytime a lot, are the things that we are going to help work on at night. We are going to set a really nice foundation to help improve things like behavioral compliance. And we are going to help them become more structured, if we think about those executive functioning deficits, we are going to really layer on the supports at bedtime, because every child really kind of struggles to stay, really on it at bedtime. But a child with ADHD whose medication has very likely worn off by that point is really going to struggle, or could really struggle to follow along with that bedtime routine. So we're going to layer on a little more support for them. We're going to have a hyper structured, I would say, bedtime routine with them. And we're going to have very desired, specific part in kind of bedtime timing with, oh my God, I'm being really redundant, what time they're going to bed. And so we're going to help layer on the structure. And we're going to use a lot of behavioral principles like behavioral shaping. We're going to use a lot of kind of maybe planned ignoring if they're engaging in these more minor behaviors. I'm not tired. I don't like brushing my teeth. These jammies feel weird. And we're going to use a lot of kind of attention, labeled praise, possible reward systems to help move them toward bed. And again, adding to that structure. And then we have to really be mindful of things, because if they are more likely to be phase delayed, we're going to be more mindful of those sleep hygiene, sleep habit things. Keeping them away from sun and natural light at bedtime is going to be even more paramount with this population. And if we are doing, again, so kind of a little callback, if we are doing all of the behavioral strategies and we are still not seeing adequate, they're still taking a long time to fall asleep, this is when we can consult a pediatrician around using melatonin, because it is a supported population to use it, because we do know that this is a subtype of children that really actually struggle to produce enough melatonin or at an appropriate timing, developmentally appropriate time for them. So it might be a good option on the table for them that is well supported by research.
And that's true as well. I think I lost focus there. You were talking about ADHD, but that's also true for children and teens on the spectrum, that there's research with melatonin use. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just like word vomited for about 5 minutes there. Yep, that makes sense. I kind of
I asked the question for about 4 populations, so I can't imagine why it was hard to answer all at once,
So if someone is in Michigan or someone is in New Jersey, both large states, so probably I should be more specific, but obviously they could seek both of you out, which would be fantastic for our listeners in all of the other states in the U.S. Is there a recommendation, a way that you would suggest someone find an expert in behavioral sleep?
I'm just blanking on the website. The BDS, what is that one? I can't think of it.
Oh, yes. Oh my God, the Society for Behavioral Sleep Medicine. You almost went real other direction. You almost went real other side.
Yeah,
I was actually, my heart was hit about.
I know where I was going.
And that was a panic attack.
Along with your cough, that's also going to have to be cut. Yep. The SBSM, the Society for Behavioral Sleep Medicine. Is a good place. They have a good directory of people that have board certification, like our colleague, Dr. Harris, in behavioral sleep medicine. What is really tricky, we will say, is that, yes, we are available in private practice, in our states. We often still will say, like, start at your pediatrician. Are they going to have resources for you? Not sure. They might not. A lot of hospital systems have a sleep lab, and some of those sleep labs have a pediatric department that should, in theory, have a psychologist or some sort of mental health professional on staff that does know about behavioral sleep medicine in the pediatric population. So they could be a good place to start as well. It's really tricky. The pediatric sleep field is the size of my pinky nail. It feels really, really small. And I think it is made a little bit more complicated by kind of social media and people that just have so many opinions on sleep and pediatric sleep and thoughts on what to do and what not to do. And you really want to be thoughtful about working with a professional who has, I think, the adequate training and understanding, because again, while some of these behavioral principles are not rocket science at all, I think it is important that we have this real foundational understanding of what healthy sleep is and the possible medical complications that there could be that we always want to be mindful of. So if it were my child, I would really want someone who has, I think, that real experience and training in that department.
Very good. So just to say that again, because I know we we had a good laugh there. It's the Society for Behavioral Sleep Medicine.
Yeah.
Is that correct? And you can look there. And correct me if I'm wrong. If someone maybe had a child on the autism spectrum, there might be someone with that specialty listed on that site. So not only having the sleep expertise, but also additional expertise. We had an expert in autism come on a few weeks back, and she was commenting similar thing. That's a small field, hard to find people. And she was even saying that sometimes, even if there's not an expert in your area, there might be someone that you could get on a Zoom call for like a quarterly touch base, or, there are different ways to do it, but people have to be fastidious and really looking, and going to places to find experts, that know about what you need.
Yeah, I think
Allison and I both have.
we both have what PSY-PACT, so we see people in lots of different states, which is a really nice thing that psychologists can do now. But something I'll often tell people when they're searching those websites is to look at the states around their state, right? So like a lot of people in New Jersey are licensed in New York and Connecticut and Pennsylvania. So if you live wherever you live, it's sometimes worth it to call people around, because a lot of times they can see you on a Zoom somewhere, kind of nearby. So don't limit your search when you're looking for someone to just within 5 minutes of where you live. Telehealth is great. And so many people in so many states can see people in other places. So it can be worth, a half hour of phone calls to potentially find, to be able to find more people that can actually help you with what you're looking for.
That is very, very good advice. I think that's a wonderful space for us to sort of wrap up for today. Again, we want to encourage everybody that has teens or tweens or children, younger children, obviously, with sleep problems, to check out The Essential Guide to Children's Sleep by Dr. Roth, Dr. Shale, and Dr. Harris. You can pick that up on Amazon or wherever you like to get your books. Additionally, if you have any questions for us or feedbacks for us, or feedback on this episode or any others, don't hesitate to reach out. We'd be delighted to hear from you. Just DM us on Instagram.
Dr. Roth, Dr. Shale, thank you so much for joining us again. We've really appreciated this discussion.
Thank you.
All right, see you soon.